everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Can everyone hear me okay? I just did something. Just hit some dial on my show.
This is your guest's problem.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, I actually, something, I must have hit something. Rebel, do we? Okay, good. I hit some button by mistake, and everything went dark. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is CJ Liu on the Fire It Up with CJ show, and we're talking to Dr. Ruth Richards, who is the author of this book, Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind, Dynamic New Paths for Self and Society. And today we're going to talk about creativity. And I also have to mention that Dr. Ruth, I love that. I'll be asking you questions about sex intertwined with this. Dr. Ruth told me that this is a Silver Nautilus Book Award. It won the Silver Award for Creative Process. So welcome.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, sometimes people say, oh, you're not that Dr. Ruth. Sorry. This is really good. It's different, but it's good too.
It's a different kind of creative process, right?
Yeah. Well, it can be about anything.
All right. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the creative process. You say that we all have universal creative process, and I want to find out a little bit about what that means.
Sure. What I'd say this book really is about three things, and number one answers your question. So what I've studied with colleagues at Harvard Medical School and McLean Hospital for years, including Dennis Kinney, is everyday creativity. But point one is, you say, what's that? Point one is most people don't know what that is. They don't know we all have it. They don't know it keeps us alive. They don't know this helps us find out what we're living for, because they think, a lot of people do, I can't draw a picture, I'm not creative. I can't sing a song, it's about the arts. And that's it. Nothing wrong with the arts. But this is about a way of life that's relevant to many things, including the arts and including the other Dr. Ruth. So we define this, just we got to get a definition in here somewhere, as the originality of everyday life. So this is how we live freshly, aware, alive, open. This is really good stuff, and as a way of life. But a lot of times people are interested much more in what product they get out of this. So we're looking for a creative product, a dance, a campaign for the school, what to do with our child in a certain tricky situation, etc. It can be anything. What to make for dinner when you don't have many ingredients left. Right. And all of this can be very original or not. Or in our studies, one of our participants was an auto mechanic who made his own tools. Now, that's really interesting. Some people that are auto mechanics, we know they can be creative or not, and we've probably all met one who isn't so good. But this guy was particularly unusual because he had his own way of doing things. It might have been doing the same old thing, but in his own way. So this is not about a particular product. It's about how we approach life and how freshly and how aware. Anyway, this is point one, is really much more than what it is. It's that, do we even see it?
Okay, do we see it? We actually live in a place where we're living in a more fresh and aware place. So tell me how your day began. You're in New York City. And how did you live in this originality of every day? How did you make this day for yourself be kind of a lived experience?
Oh, I don't know. I probably could give you bad examples, but if you like, I could read you something from this book about being aware, which is a bad example.
Okay,
and so number one is really being aware. So we go through a lot, and I want to get back to the other 2 points here, but we go through a lot of our day, and often for good reason, following some template that we've lived forever. So this is the way we drive to work. This is how we get our things out to do what we do. And a lot of times we may not even be aware of what we're doing. I was at a spiritual retreat. I'm a meditator. I'm a Buddhist and very interfaith, and was buying something so I'm giving you bad examples, was buying something at the gift shop at this lovely mountain retreat from another person who was a Buddhist and selling stuff at the gift shop. And what happened was that I gave her my credit card. She ran it. I bought the stuff. And then I said, did I get my credit card back? And she said, I don't know. So neither of us had any idea of what we'd been doing at this one place where this was kind of primary and really important. So anyway, I'm going to read you this vignette because this really struck me. And later, if we have time, I'd like to do one on empathy, because there's something people don't usually link with creativity, and we sure do. But without awareness, we're not going anywhere, creatively or in general.
Okay.
Right? So this was real in a number of years ago, and it's in chapter 2 of this book. Chapter 2 is called Missing Worlds, and that's the point. I'm rather good at maps. I'm also good at using a GPS device, but I forgot the maps, and here we were. Late afternoon, last day of vacation, my daughter, my cousin, and I driving along a 2-lane highway in mid-state Oregon. No other car in sight, and the sun had just gone down. Where was that charming little village? It was supposed to be right along this river. We drove on farther and farther into the unknown. River always at left as our guide. We kept passing farms and fields and scattered houses, and now a few lights were coming out. In my head, I was doing a litany of self-criticism. Why didn't we start earlier? Leave more time. Have lunch sooner. Save dessert for the little town. Bring the map, and on and on and on. A list of all we did wrong, reliving it as if this could help us now. My cousin and I were both impatient and stressed. My daughter, at least, she was good, at least was happy in the back seat, text messaging a friend. I pull up on the shoulder of the road to think. Just then, wow, amazing. A new scene had appeared, a new slide projected on the screen. Where did it come from? Look, I insisted. Even my daughter looked up. Right there, out of nowhere, a magical, misty landscape. Fields moving off to infinity in muted purples and pastels, fuzzy in the haze, with clusters of tall, lush trees darkening and receding in the dusk. I turned the car engine off. All was silent in the hot summer air. Beside us, a plum-colored river barely moved between a border of trees, its dark, lazy water reflecting the last light of day. How breathtaking! This landscape had cast a spell. We sat in the silence of an indrawn breath. Where had it been? If I had seen even a trace of this beauty while driving along, not a neuron had registered it. No mental bell had rung so that the conscious mind could stop and take a look. I had missed it all. We all had missed it. We miss, a little more on the point here, we miss a lot. Almost everything, in fact, in our world. Our task-focused filters take care of that. Selecting only what we need. We need to get to work, have some lunch, find that report, water the garden, go out on a date. We see what we need to see, often for purposes of survival or survival of the species. Gregory Bateson, speaking of beauty, said aesthetic judgment is selection of a fact. We create the sight, even as we become conscious of it. We do not simply see it. In our daily lives, who or what is doing the selecting. And why? Is this predetermined? Can we, in the here and now, make a change? Can we see further? Can we see better? Can we even better our world? Opening our vision is the first step in everyday creativity.
Okay, so this was, you had said that, and let me just to summarize this first part of your what you're trying to do with this book. You had said that one of the main points of the book is everyday creativity, specifically living every day as if it was an original day. I think is what you said, the originality of everyday life. And you had said the thing that is critical is awareness. And then you had said that you read the story. So, and one of the listeners has asked, "Is this a real story?" And this is a real story
Oh,
of your life.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
And one that stayed with me. I think we all have stories like this. So it's actually was posted online at awaken.org. I was asked to submit it some years ago, and various people responded there with their own similar stories. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah.
you're in your guidebook, you're planning the day, lunch, all this other stuff. You're wondering, thinking about the maps where you were, and you were trying to get to this river. Is that right? Is that what you said in the very beginning?
Oh, we were trying to get to this town that was supposed to be special in this way and that, and
Ah.
it was along the river. So we kind of thought if we're along the river, we're doing okay here, but we weren't. We kept going.
Okay, so you're focused on the process, on the end point, getting to the town and having
That's
your
right.
experience. Yet, because you were not you're selectively seeing for a task. You weren't seeing things or opening your vision. You kind of missed that you were going along this beautiful countryside along with and not enjoying the beauty of the world around you.
Yeah.
So that's the first part of creativity is that creativity is happening outside of us, all around us. We're part of it, but we don't notice. We don't have the eyes and awareness to see.
So that was very good. I'm a college professor, right? To give you a good score. But let me add to that
Sure.
that there are several aspects to this. I would say the main one is we do have this infinitesimal in our manifest world, what we think we see. First of all, we're kind of creating it ourselves. So yours is going to be different than mine because I'm filtering it through all these expectations and things I have. So then in this case, focused only on the future, I was missing, and so was my cousin, was missing the present moment completely, right? Or at least the good part of it. We were looking for these stop signs, and my daughter was doing something entirely different. So her world was different. And then when we weren't doing so well, we were going through the past and say, should have done this, should have done that.
Right.
With all this so it's like nothing. It's kind of a perfect example of not being mindful, right? Except of what happened in the past and what we fear for the future.
Right.
And so to be creative, to be open, to be, it's really to stand on the borders of possibility, of infinity, of all these things that could be, really means to be in a different state of consciousness, which is much more receptive and aware. And we can get to that, but I wanted to give the bad example, and yes, that was totally real and one of the worst.
Okay, so
Yeah.
basically, so what your additional point is that, we see the world through our lens being shaped by our experience, and so, and I've noticed. I went to a silent retreat, and what I noticed during a silent retreat, and it's a Vipassana retreat where there was labeling, and you would take different things as you're sitting there trying to be silent, focusing on your breath. You would notice whether you had a thought, a feeling, an emotion, and you would just label it like, oh, thought, breathing, oh, feeling, my back hurts. Oh, so you'd have this
Yeah.
Vipassana, and then what I realized when I was actually thinking, my thinking actually had a categorization within it, and it was all about future thinking, future
Mm-hmm.
planning and thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I were in the car with you, I would probably have my own perspective focusing
Mm-hmm.
as well about, along with you, about
Mm-hmm.
future and
Yeah,
planning.
right.
Some other people may kind of be thinking about their emotional state, thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
past. And,
Right.
this reminds me of my childhood, which makes me really
Mm-hmm.
sad. And like, I'm really sad right now in the car. But
Mm-hmm.
all of those experiences shape
Mm-hmm.
so if we were not in our own individuated point of consciousness, our
Mm-hmm.
own view, we could open up, be receptive, and see that
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole world around us.
Yeah.
That's the first
Now,
part of your book. Is anything else to add before we move to
oh,
the
there's
second point of your book?
so much more to add. But here, I'm going to show the book here
Okay.
because there are a lot of little caveats to all that, and it's really important. Like maybe what I'm thinking about that I'm so sad about is exactly what I want to now write a song about. Let's just say
Mm,
to make it up, and that's
mm.
fine. This is not like you can't have a past or a future or worry about
Ah,
that.
right, yes.
It's are we being intentional? Are we being aware of what we want to do? And but if I'm just looking for some kind of insight, and I want to give you a study later, we can talk about if we have time. Talk about the aha moment because
Mm-hmm.
we actually know a little about the brain now and what's happening during the aha moment.
Mm.
Not to say the mind and the brain are the same thing, but
Okay, well,
anyway.
actually, let's move to
Um,
you talk about the four P's of creativity, and
okay.
which stand for product, person, process, and press. And you had started I'm going to move to our second part. We've been talking to
Okay.
Dr. Ruth Richards about her book, Everyday Creativity and Healthy Mind Dynamics. Dynamic New Paths for Self and Society. So, in your book, you talk about the four P's: product, person, process, and press. And you had said in our when we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
the everyday creativity that we often think about creativity like drawing and singing, but it's happened every day, and that we focus
Mm-hmm.
so much on the product versus
Mm-hmm.
and the process than we
Mm-hmm.
do think about the other things. So tell me a little bit about what all of this means and the neurological stuff that you found out.
Okay. First, the point number two takes off precisely from this,
Okay.
that that we are sitting here. We think focused on this product,
Mm-hmm.
and for some people, once we've done that, we're done. And by the way, if that's your interest in reading this book, there are plenty of hints in here about how you can, have more creative thoughts and ideas. But let's not stop there.
Okay.
So, where is this coming from? If we turn the camera around from this creative thing that we're doing to see who is doing it, person, how we are doing it, process, and the environmental press is more complicated than you might think, but the environmental conditions. If you have a mean boss who says, that's no good, it doesn't help.
Mm.
But it gets even more interesting if we bring in things like epigenetics, which there's a little in there about. Sometimes we are called by our environment in ways we don't even know, while we think we're in control.
Mm.
But anyway, all where we are, what we're doing, who we're with, that's all important.
Okay,
Okay.
so let's say I'm going to just go back for people who aren't
Mm-hmm.
maybe not tracking. So let's say
Yeah,
that we're
right.
thinking about focusing on building a product. So it could be
Uh-huh.
um, the mechanic that you mentioned before who's actually
Mm-hmm.
building the tools to make the car. It could be
Right.
the traditional, like playing a musical
Mm-hmm.
instrument, or it could be writing a marketing plan or creating a radio
Right.
show. These are all processes of
Absolutely.
creating a product. And so you said that we have to think about who, the person, how the process, and then also the press or like the environmental conditions. So tell me how
Mm-hmm.
that all works together in your four P's.
Well, what I'd like to do is have your listeners, have all of us think about ways we may be missing now. I
Okay.
can't emphasize enough how much we're missing about ways we're being creative right now, but we are labeling something else creative.
Yeah, it could be
Famous people are
cooking. Yeah,
creative.
thanks. Yeah, we could be
Yeah.
cooking a
Okay.
meal.
But what are some of the process hints?
Hmm.
So, like, do you ever have a hunch? Do you ever have an intuition? Do you try this and then do you try that? Can you be flexible? Can we be flexible to do one thing and then do another? We all do this, or we as a species wouldn't be alive. This has helped us get out of the woods when we were lost or escape from some predator, and all of that's important if you want to stay alive. It's helped in many other ways too. And we as human beings have this as part of our birthright, that we are able, within the limits of who we are and kind of what we were born with biologically, to go everywhere.
Okay, so I'm a little confused with your process comment. So the process is how we come about creating the product. And
okay.
So your point is that it starts with a hunch or an intuition, or I want to make sure I understand your point.
Okay, I'm not telling anyone how it starts.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, because there are as many processes as you can imagine, what I'm saying is we all have some ways of opening to the new. What we do in a certain place. Thank you, that's very clarifying. What we would do in a certain place, I can't tell you that, you know that, but that we are able to stop, to be aware, to see what's going on, and to think, what else, okay? And we do this a lot of times. And, you know, we've looked at some of the examples, but if you started thinking of your own life, or one of our students who was at a seminar we were doing jumped on a chair. This is like a, you know, woman who has older kids jumped on a chair, right? And said, oh, I'm creative. She didn't realize that all the things she'd been doing as a homemaker, as a mother, and in many other areas would count, because she had a different definition in mind. And so many people think that way. That's why I want to emphasize that we're looking at a way of life. So now we've looked at hunches, whatever you like. What does this mean if we're looking more at the person and who we are in an ongoing way? Again, it's not about how we start, or you do this, you do that. You got to, you know, you have to figure a little of that out for yourself. That this means, as with your Vipassana, how interesting that mindfulness predicts for creativity, isn't it? And especially when we're looking for insight, for new ideas, because this is the more open, receptive place where, for any meditator who's listening, as in a kind of mindfulness setting, you wouldn't be looking at something specific. You'd be kind of aware of everything, and accepting, not judging, just letting everything happen, and maybe labeling if something seems to be intruding, presumably. Okay, but here we are, and it really involves attitudes that have, this isn't just something someone made up, that have been well researched, that seem to go along with being creative in general.
Okay. And
that includes being very open. This is a biggie, open to experience. And there's a whole list of them, but openness to experience is as important as anything else. And that involves it's really quite related to mindfulness in a number of ways. It's not just, okay, now I'm noticing stuff right here, but it's interest as well as awareness. And it's really a cognitive style. It's a way of being, you know, because you could go around not caring at all or turning it all off. So that is one of them. But there's awareness, there's openness, there's less defensiveness, because we're all defensive, right? There are things we don't really want to know. And if you think about our unconscious mind, whatever model you like, the fact is, a lot of our experience isn't in our immediate awareness right now. And some of it isn't much at all, because we've kind of banished it. We don't want to think about that one. And some things we may never have pondered. People who tend to be more creative and who enjoy it, right? They go together, tend to have more access to that unconscious content, which can be developed. And I got a study on that, actually, I will mention in a minute. Have more access, and that means more willingness to look. And that means not just being less defensive, but less kind of connected to some fixed image of ourselves, which some people give the word ego to, that they're trying to defend. Well, I'm like this and I'm like that. Oops, maybe not. And besides, we're all a process. It's like process really is the key word here. This is, and we can also talk about this book here in terms of dynamic systems and chaos theory, because everything is changing. We are changing from the beginning of this show, and definitely from when we were each 2 years old. So
let me make sure I want to actually make sure I understand what you're saying so far. So we started off
go for it.
talking about the 4 P's of creativity. And I think we covered the first one, which is about product, which is what I think most people like. I need to produce, the meal, whatever. And I think your point about the homemaker that jumped on the chair is that a lot of the products she wasn't even considering or creative were in fact creative. Like we have this like diminished sense of what we have a very minute, small point of like definition of what creativity is, but it's much broader than what people. So that's product. There's person, and you're saying that there are, and I want to circle back to a point that you made. You said there's lots of different attitudinal things that are required for creativity. In fact, they've done research that shows that, open to new experience, interests, you have a certain cognitive style that's less defensive, more willing to look, no fixed image of yourselves. And then you said that you had some research report on that. Tell me about what that is.
Okay. Shall I do press first, just so we wrap up the 3?
Yeah.
The environmental?
So the process, I think, as I understand it, is that you're saying that one, I think the point that you're making earlier is that we all have an individual process. It's not like step 1, 2, 3, 4, and everyone can follow the same 4 steps. Everyone's going to have their own customizable way of thinking about creativity, which I think is really important because there's so many books out there on creativity. And if you read one and it doesn't work on it, you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? But if you instead thinking about, I actually have a creative process that really works for me, and getting clear with what that is, whether it starts with a hunch or an intuition or whatever it is. But you're saying that even that is kind of a changing, evolving process. I think
okay.
That's what you're saying.
I don't want to make it too complicated. And when I get back to California, where I'm from, I'm going to do some workshops at some bookstores about this, where we will actually go through some things where people can have some success.
Okay.
But generally speaking, it's much more individual. And that last P is about the conditions, though. And those are really important, where you feel safe, where you can take risks. And this gets into person, too. Because if you're not willing to be wrong, how can you ever come up with anything new? So as we grow up, we've got to do this perfectly. This is about trying things out. Okay? It's very different. Now, in general, what I can say about, and let's go back to process here, is it's not so much what you do as how you do it. And that's why we're really talking about a way of life here. It's not just now I'm going to turn on my creativity so I can make a unique dinner, or I can figure out what to do in the backyard, or I can plan a really good fundraising campaign for a very worthy cause. No, it's people tend to live this. And so let's look at the study here, though. Okay. Because the study is more looking at how do we kind of get better at, if you want to, diving deep. It's called deep sea diving in this book. Deep sea diving into our unconscious contents of mind. You don't have to be a Freudian or in anything. We all know we got that there, whatever you want to call it. So this one researcher, James Pennebaker, and many others since, as well as his group, have decided to have some people do expressive writing. So this is kind of free writing about something that really was horrible in their lives, something that was so bad that they had never told anyone about it. Okay, and that's and he didn't think this would work out originally, and it worked out so well. And this could also be applied to visual arts and a lot of other things, journaling, talking to a counselor. But we're talking about expressive writing. So here, this one group, and they're often college students. So the college students were writing about this really horrible thing. Okay. And another group, a control group, was writing about something pretty neutral, like what their shoes looked like, unless that was terribly upsetting. But the first group, for them, it really was. And if you think about it, if you think about yourself, it's worth trying this. You may pick something that you might be aware of, or you wouldn't have thought of it, but that you don't think about a whole lot yourself. So it's also bringing it to the surface for yourself. So they did this, and they did it about 20 minutes a day for 4 days. It's kind of like a cardiac routine. It's literally what some people do. Yeah.
20 minutes a day for 4 days, you said?
For 4 days, but they were broken up in a certain way, and it had to do with the research protocol. There are different books by Pennebaker, and of course, if you get this book, it will give you references. This is a very heavily referenced book, but not in the chapters. Right. It has endnotes, and it has references at the end. So any of this is in there, and much more.
Okay.
So what you have here.
What did the research find then after they took these students?
Yeah, what you have here are people who kept showing up, and they did this. So right after, you say, did these people who were writing about the difficult thing, were they feeling good? No, not at all. They were feeling awful, because here they had unearthed something traumatic. Okay, the other people, okay. So 6 weeks later, what do you find? And there have been many other studies since. 6 weeks later, the first group, called the experimental group, had gone significantly fewer times to the Student Health Service for anything.
The one who wrote about their trauma.
The one who wrote about whatever it was had gone less times. We can guess why that's true, but they had. All right. And there was something else for those who say, they don't care about psychology. Who knows? Our minds and bodies are very connected if those are separate to begin with, right? And mind, body, spirit is a whole other issue. But at the beginning, before they wrote about anything, these people had their blood drawn. And their blood was drawn to get indices on 2 measures which have to do with white blood cells, and in particular, to be specific, with killer T cells that go after the causes of disease that we don't really want to have. So that was done, and then it was done again 6 weeks later.
For this group that went in for the study. Okay, got it.
For both groups. And what was shown there was that the people who had written about this difficult situation, I'll give you some examples in a minute, were higher on these white cells. That is, they had more defense. Their immune system was stronger. They were more able to fight disease than the other group.
Interesting. Okay,
very interesting. And not just from one study.
Okay, so this was in regards, just to map this to your 4 Ps, this is in terms of environmental. Is that right? Or is this related to process? I'm just a little bit confused.
Oh, we'll say why would this be? Are you saying why would this be?
How is this? Well, I think here's how I follow.
It's good for you. It's good for you to go into the unconscious, at least in these conditions. Okay. So let me say, this is about people whose process is such that they're being brave, resilient, risky. They're looking at something they wouldn't normally look at. Okay, caution. We don't always want to do that or say it's good for everything.
Okay, got it.
So this is really important. And by the way, I'm a psychiatrist and an educational psychologist.
Okay.
So that for the people who were doing this, and they were, the kind of topics that came up are some of the things you'd think about for people who are starting college, who are lonely, or they miss being at home, or they wish they went somewhere else, or they miss, so-and-so. But there were also people who did bring up abuse and trauma and so on. And that's no abuse and trauma is going to be, serious trauma is going to be fixed by writing a little bit. in a research study, although obviously people could bring up whatever they wanted. But it may have, for some of these people, really opened up something where they went further with treatment and with revealing to people what had happened that they needed to do. In any event, these are the kinds of things that happened. And I think what we're seeing here has to do with all of the P's, okay? The product involved some revelation. The process was one that was risky. Some are very simple. You say, oh, that's nice. But this wasn't, and it wasn't intended to be. For the people, I don't actually know what they expected to get into beforehand, and anyone could have stopped at any time. This is how research protocols work. But they were willing as individuals to take on this challenge. And the context, the press, was one where they felt safe. So the researchers were telling them, you can stop at any time, this is, et cetera. So that this really created a kind of container. And the safety part's really important for us always.
Right. So all of these things kind of created a conducive environment. The people were given, because they were feeling safe, they were, and it sounds like as a result of doing this, something transformed or shifted in them because they're safe. They then became open. As a result of being open, the process changed them. And then what they created, what I think it sounds like is transformation, is the transformation product. And then, by the way, other effects that were probably unanticipated were the epigenetic changes that you talked about, which is that they had better immune systems. And I think you also said that they actually had better mental health because they actually didn't go. So there were some kind of unexpected benefits of this creative process.
I would say that this creative process is one that in this safe container could lead to better mental health. I don't want to say that's what happened to them, because they may have gone into the health center less because they hadn't stumbled on the steps. But who knows what was happening? They may have felt more empowered to take care of things, whatever it was. Sorry if you're hearing a
you're in New York, so we hear like the creative.
You're hearing it.
We're enjoying being present to the beautiful noises of New York. Okay, so we talked about the second part of your book. Tell me about the third part that you had said. There are three parts.
Okay. So it's less, I'm going to tell you the structure of the book is really the 4 Ps. And then there are then there's a whole mental health section. So I've done a lot of that, which we have not gotten into.
Yeah, you asked me to remind you about empathy, so I'm doing that.
And including on mood disorders and so on. That's a whole section. And then there's a section on new directions, which includes things like relationships and empathy, also beauty and awe, also nature, and some lovely things that also have to do with process and chaos theory. And I doubt we're going to get to all of those. But I'm happy to say a little about empathy. However, point number 3, you don't have to get to all of that to get to. So number 1 is we're missing a lot of this creativity. Number 2 is it's so good for us. And it's not about doing a few things. It's about how we live. And it can be empowering and healthy. Point number 3 is all else being equal, it can take us higher. It can take us to really good places in our lives. And which can include, for some people, a spiritual path or a humanistic way of living. I'll give you some examples of that and why that would be true, but maybe that's already clear, all right? But this is if all else is equal. So we know that there are people who use being creative malevolently, intentionally to do harm, to blow people, to do things that are really not nice and very harmful. And so it's not guaranteed here that someone who's going to be creative is going to end up being a good person or an ethical person. But that's also something that I'm very interested in, and that's in here among other things. Okay, but let's look at some of the kinds of person qualities we've talked about here. And it includes being some we didn't quite get to, being visionary. We're open to more than one thing. We're open, but to what? That many possibilities exist. Maybe that we see things differently than others do. We are less defensive, so we're willing to look more inside, but also outside. So how often do we go down the street and ignore what we don't want to see there? And there's plenty around here to notice of people who, don't have enough to eat, of people who are really desperate in one way or another. And can we get kind of inured to that and turning, yes, right? All of us, turning things off. If we're truly, here we get into empathy and compassion, compassionate, empathy isn't quite at the level of compassion. We're going to want to do something. We're going to feel with them. We may feel as them. We want to help relieve that suffering. Okay? All of this is helped by movement along this path. It's not guaranteed. There are people who are just using their creativity for a particular area, and that's where it stopped. But if you look at the kinds of things we're talking about, less defensive, we're willing to not know. Right? We're willing to not know, and maybe we don't know everything we thought we did. We were telling our kids we did. They knew we didn't. All right.
Okay, so let me actually do, let's go back to, just so people can see the book and what we're talking about. We've been talking to Dr. Ruth Richards, who is a professor at Saybrook University, a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and she's written lots of books. This is her Silver Nautilus award-winning book, Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind. And you were talking about, let me see if I got this correctly, that once we live in seeing the creativity that surrounds us all the time, and we open ourselves up, and we are less defensive, the new directions our life can go is that we can feel more empathetic, we can have visionary abilities, we have more beauty in our life, we can be okay with the unknown, and a lot of people feel like this can take them on a spiritual path. So when you talk about new movements, these are, once we have this new way of living, there are kind of all these kind of benefits that come with that. Is that what you mean by new directions?
What I'm meaning is that where it would take you is up to you, but it opens us to more.
Okay.
So that if you looked at, and actually I do want to go back to the aha moment here for a minute, because the aha moment's a risk, okay? But if you look at humanistic psychology, Saybrook is a humanistic school. I've spent most of my teaching time at Saybrook, or teaching or clinical time, or at Harvard Medical School and McLean Hospital. But also, I'd say originally taught in this area at Boston University. If you look at humanistic, you will find, for example, that Abraham Maslow, who's one of the founders, who was at Brandeis, began studying a group of people he called self-actualizing people, who really seemed to be unfolding their fuller capabilities of all kinds. But what he found was, among other things, that these were people who tended to show in their personal kind of way of life some of these qualities we've been talking about, whether it's originality or openness or lack of defensiveness or more spontaneity. They were more involved in life. They had more fun. Although these were very serious people at times, like Eleanor Roosevelt, there also could be more of a childlike enjoyment, which I'm sure their kids appreciated too. So that a lot of what we're talking about here goes along with a way of life. It doesn't guarantee it. It doesn't mean you're on that path, but isn't that interesting? Also doesn't mean you're on a spiritual path, but it's sure going to help when you're meditating. If you're open, you're less defensive, etc. Okay, so here you have it, to the extent that Maslow even said he thought that self-actualizing was a lot less about the particular thing someone did, the product, than it was about this way of life, the person. Okay, and he talked about, in that context, self-actualizing creativity. Because I'm not sure how much time we have, I'm going to jump to their 3 examples in the last chapter. I have all these notes here.
Yeah, we
I
have
will not
5
be able
minutes.
to,
We have 5 minutes
yeah,
just to kind of meter out. And you also
not be
wanted to
able
tell
to.
us about the aha moment. So
I
you have
well,
5 minutes.
I'm going to still mention the 3 at the end are 3 examples of higher consciousness. And one of them has to do with Abraham Maslow's later stages for these self-actualizing people. Another one has to do with Walt Whitman, who's a wonderful poet. I just got to read in the Whitman Bicentennial Marathon here recently. But he also showed higher, whatever you want to call it, something more, higher consciousness. And the third one is a group one that has to do with working with a group using Theory U at MIT. It's a business kind of strategy, but it involves meditation, altered consciousness, stuff you don't usually consider. We got ways to go. We've got places to go. Okay. Aha moment. So this is key. It's not the whole thing, right? You get an insight, but then you got to do something with it. But if you don't have that light bulb go off, then what, right? So, so what's happening when that happens? And let me just give you something, and I'll do this quickly. So there have been studies done of kind of anagrams. You take these letters, you scramble them, and meanwhile, this poor person who's unscrambling letters is hooked up to EEGs or fMRIs or something. And this is Kunios and Beeman's work. If you want to read about our work on mental health, read the book. Anyway, here you have, if I gave you these, DAP, DEL, and I said make a word out of that. I'm not going to wait for you to do that with 2 minutes left, but
Pedal.
and there might, hey, woo, pedal, right? And there might be more than one. Okay, but did you get that boom? Did it come to you suddenly?
I think so. I don't know. I just looked at it and I'm like, okay, I think it's pedal.
Okay, and that's certainly an answer. Or you could do it logically. I'm going to try starting with P's, then starting with, and it's all good. There's no one way.
Right.
But what they did was they took the 2 groups. There were 3 groups. You could mix it up. They took the insight people, they took the logical people, and they looked to see what had been going on in their brains. And there was a difference.
Interesting.
There was a very cool difference, too, because the people who had the insight, remember, and we're all having insights all the time. So it's not like just some did, but who did at that moment, first of all, shifted to another state of consciousness. Altered states of consciousness are important here, and they're not unusual. We have them all the time, right? Not just during meditating either, but it's another connection. So they had a downshift to alpha waves. Those are slower waves. Downshift to alpha, but they gave it a cool name, the alpha flash.
Wow.
So they downshifted. Also, they were downshifting away from the outer world, the distractions of the outer world, to something inside, right before the aha. Okay? And then they went into a rapid gammas very fast compared to this slower alpha and had the insight. So there's this whole orchestration going on in the brain.
Yeah.
And I could also tell you, but I don't think we have time, I'd rather sum up, about what the experience was of people in some of these studies. But one of the really interesting things is it seemed like some of them could turn on this state in advance. And I bet, talking to listeners here, many people here know what it tastes like almost, or feels like, or smells like. But it hasn't really been a focus in most of the research on creativity. How we alter our consciousness all the time. You want a mental block? Do something that leads to that rapid stuff.
Alpha, or like alpha state, right? And
Alpha's
then pop
good.
up.
Yeah,
Right? Alpha or
alpha's
theta
more
state.
like 8 to 12, right? 8 to 12 cycles per second. Yeah. And so that doesn't mean biofeedback would help it. It might. Lots of things. But the main points again have to do with we are being creative. We don't know it. We could be so much more if we developed it. It's good for us, and it can take us higher.
Love it. Okay, we've been talking. That's a great summation. We've been talking to Dr. Ruth Richards about her book, Everyday Creativity. and the Healthy Mind, Dynamic New Paths for Self and Society. Thank you so much, and congratulations on winning this award.
Oh, thank you, and congratulations on your good questions.
Oh, thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.